companies have a special tool that they use to attract business. Now, some of them rely on familiarity, and I've been driving Commodores since the 20th century. Last century. It sounds like a long time ago. It's not really for old people, but for you young kids, it probably sounds like a long time ago. So when I get in a Commodore, I have a certain expectation about how they should drive. Not necessarily the noises they make, but the feel of the vehicle, the general handling, and obviously through each iteration it should improve and get better, but there should always seem that little bit of familiarity from one version to the last. And once I've been driving a few test cars and I get back into my own car, that little bit of familiarity is like a I don't know, I guess there's a chemical reaction in my brain to it. Not necessarily an addiction, but when somebody makes my coffee, I don't like them changing the recipe. Actually, a similar thing happened recently. I just went away on holidays for a few days. And when I came home, I made a cup of coffee, and the coffee when I was away seemed kind of shitty. And it was still the same coffee. I had the same jar of instant coffee that I took with me when I went camping. And when I come home, I made a coffee and it tasted better. And it tasted better because I used my teaspoon, which is exactly the right size in proportion to the size of my cup. So my expectation for what a coffee should taste like and that little bit of familiarity which creates my comfort zone all comes together because of a bunch of seemingly disparate characteristics. When you get them all together, it gives you the warm and fuzzies. Now, companies have been relying on this familiarity for years, and usually the way that they reinforce that familiarity is by identifying that familiarity with a particular badge or a name. So for example, with Holden, it's the lion and the stone in the little circle, and it's the name Holden, and even the name Commodore, which we associate with large cars manufactured in Elizabeth by Holden, even though they don't actually wear the Commodore badge anymore. We still call them a Commodore because people expect, okay, it's a Commodore, so it's going to be a fairly good size, it's going to be rear-wheel drive, and I'm going to be able to fit the family in it, no problems. And it's going to have a little bit of grunt. Typically it's going to be tuned with a bit of low-down torque, and lo and behold, the VF Commodore comes out, and what is it? It's very similar to what the VE2 is, but it's a little bit better. So it still has all those senses of familiarity with a little bit of improvement. And these are the sort of things that you can rely on for brand loyalty. These are what brings people back to the brand. Now, as with everything, there's a cost for every benefit, and the cost for the benefit of having familiarity aligned with your particular brand or icon is there's a certain expectation that goes with that brand or icon. You have to have a certain capability that is aligned with the identity of that particular icon. You must have that capability in your product, or something that moderately resembles it. The stronger that you maintain the characteristics of the actual icon itself and what the consumers perceive the icon to represent, the closer you can manage to stay to that particular idea, the more likely it is that a consumer is going to be happy with joining your brand, joining your tribe, because your product meets the expectations they were looking for. So for example, if I went to go and buy a new Commodore wagon, I would expect it to be rear-wheel drive. I would expect it to be of sufficient size and performance to keep me happy, comfortable, and moving at a rate of knots that I see fit. I would I guess, expected to be made in Australia, because all the ones that I've owned previously were all Australian made. And though that particular characteristic can't be designed into a vehicle, and honestly, you can't tell the difference where a vehicle is made. Like, this car could have been made in Thailand for all I know. It wasn't. But there's no particular characteristic that was engineered into this car to make it feel like it was made in Australia. It was engineered to drive like a car that people expect to own in Australia. It was engineered to feel like the type of car that I was looking for. It has that sort of familiarity which I expected, and it met that expectation. Now here's the tricky part about icons, and also the tricky part about customer expectations. They can't always be engineered. You can't characterise a particular dimension of, say, patriotism or connection or emotional involvement. That comes from marketing. It doesn't come from the design. It doesn't come from the engineers. It comes from the marketers. So if your icon all of a sudden isn't going to meet some expectations, you better find a way for your marketing team to make it feel like those expectations are what people always wanted. How do you do that? I've got no idea, because I'm an engineer. Man, I love my car. It's obscene.